Chapter 4 of the book, Renewing the Stuff of Life by Cynthia B. Cohen, the views of early embryos of many different denominations of Christianity are expressed. The views that are expressed range from early dates, such as the 17th century, to modern day. The first views on early embryos came from the Protestant reformers. The Lutherans believed that the soul is infused into the fetus 40 days after fertilization, and therefore early embryos are not living human beings. This is a traditional view for the followers of Luther. When asked what a human being is, Luther replied, "A human being is not a rational soul, individuated by a body, but a creature who trusts either the true God or an idol." However, he still opposed destroying fetuses through abortion because it was against procreation, and procreation is the work of God. However, there was no specification between early embryo and fetuses. Now for Calvinism. Calvin also believed that abortion was wrong, but for a different reason. He believed that an unborn child in the womb of the mother is already a human being, and killing it would be murder. He was back and forth, however, on whether or not the early embryo was different from the fetus. At one point he stated that the embryo, when first conceived, has no form, but at another time he stated that the soul is infused into the embryo at conception. Those who adopted various forms of Protestantism did not embrace a single view of the moral significance of the early embryo. They had no theological or practical reason at the time to delve into what they viewed as fine distinctions between the early embryo and the later fetus, although they made it clear that they believed it wrong to destroy the later fetus. The scientific revolution brought a new aspect on how they look at embryos. Ancient and medieval Christian scholars knew little about human sperm and even less about human eggs, and did not have an understanding of how the process of fertilization occurs. Consequently, their views about the mortality of causing the deaths of embryos rested on scientific grounds. For instance, Leonardo da Vinci provided illustrations of fetuses and the dissected uteruses of a pregnant woman in a 1521 notebook of sketches. Scientists and thinkers of the time were examining living and dead humans in order to learn just how they functioned. The information provided by such drawings and other findings about how the embryo led scientific investigators to question Aristotle's biology. Two rival theories of fertilization were developed in the 17th century. The first was derived from Aristotle. It was the epigenetic view, which is a developmental theory that held that new structures emerge in the embryo that were not present from its beginning. Naturalists who examined embryos growing in animals pointed out that all of the organs had not yet formed. They therefore assumed that an individual must gradually emerge, guided by vital teleological forces that are not strictly material. The second theory, known as the preformation view, developed as a negative response to the epigenetic view. It sought to account for life in terms of matter and motion, and concluded that the organs must already be present in a preformed figure found within the egg or the sperm. Embryonic development, according to this theory, required the growth of existing structures rather than the formation of new ones. William Harvey carried out a series of experiments in 1633 based around the reproduction of deer. He could not find a fluid mixture surrounded by a membrane inside the doe's uteri. So if Aristotle's view that the semen gives shape and animation to menstrual fluid in order to form the embryo were correct, he should have found that sort of mass. This and several other experiments led scientists to reject Aristotle's epigenetic view and to embrace the preformation theory. The invention of the microscope allowed scientists to gather even more detailed information about embryos and gametes. In 1678, Anton von Leeuwenhoek viewed sperm under the microscope for the first time and claimed to see a tiny homunculus. This finding supported the major preformationist view that the male sperm contains a small human being who begins to grow with the nourishment from a material from the woman's body. In 1827, Carl Ernst von Baer discovered the human oocyte, which led scientists to realize the importance of the female role in fertilization. They reasoned that if gametes from both men and women played a part in the creation of children, and these gametes united at conception, an individual human must being must somehow be present at conception, albeit not in a specific gamete. As a result, the epigenetic theory was abandoned. Many people soon began to give greater consideration to the idea that humans obtain their soul at conception. This was mostly from the Roman Catholics, who had this view because of the affirmation of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary by Pope Pius VI as an article of faith in 1854. Since, according to this doctrine, Mary was without sin from her conception, it was reasoned she must have been ensouled at the time of conception rather than 90 days later. In modern times, however, many theologians are looking back and questioning their old views due to embryological findings. Bernard Haring wrote in 1973 that before the 14th day of embryonic development, there has not emerged a human person. Individualization seems not to have reached the point which is indispensable to personhood. Thus, it is a common assumption that only a human life possessing irreversible individuality can be a person. However, in the 1987 Congressional for the Doctrine of Faith responded by saying, "The human being must be respected as a person from the very first instant of his existence. Thus, the fruit of human generation from the first moment of his existence, that is to say, from the moment the zygote has formed, demands the unconditional respect that is morally due to the human being in his bodily and spiritual totality. The human being is to be respected and treated as a person from the moment of conception." In 2006, Pope Benedict XVI also expressed his view, telling those at a Vatican conference that there should be no moral distinction between the embryo before and after implantation. The Roman Catholic tradition is engaged in an ongoing process of discernment, she explained, that remains faithful to its theological and ethical conviction and takes account of the best scientific evidence. Thus, in her view, whether to consider the early human embryo a living human being is still under discussion within the Roman Catholic Church. The Eastern Orthodox tradition holds that the early embryo is a potential human person and is therefore owed protection from the destruction in stem cell research. Protestant bodies have not chosen one view of the moral significance of early embryos, but tend to take opposite approaches of this issue. The Southern Baptist Convention agrees with those Roman Catholics who believe that the human embryos should be treated as human beings from the moment of conception. However, the Southern Baptist denomination steps away from the Eastern Orthodox view by it believing that the human embryo is an actual rather than a potential person. Many other Protestant groups, like the Anglican Episcopal, agree with the becoming of a human until 14 days after the sperm and egg meet. At this time, the human embryo may gradually begin to develop into a human being if it is not damaged and surrounding conditions enable it to do so. However, not all churches are against stem cell research. The General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church endorses embryonic stem cell research and released a statement. "We believe, as do most authorities that have addressed the issue, that human embryos do have the potential of personhood, and as such, they deserve respect. Requiring that the interests or goals to be accomplished by using human embryos be compelling and unreachable by other means must show that respect. Prohibition of the derivation of stem cells from embryos would elevate the showing of respect to human embryos above that of helping persons whose pain and suffering might be alleviated." Having all these differing views from the different denominations leads to a standstill. All this leads to is bickering of who is right, and the progress of stem cell research is at a halt. Until we can figure out who is morally right or just put differences aside, the potential of stem cells is currently lost.